I still remember the sting in my chest more than the pain in my body, because by the time my son arrived, I had already screamed myself hoarse. The contractions had chewed through every nerve I owned, and the cheap public hospital room in Houston smelled like disinfectant and old fear. Yet none of that compared to the moment my husband walked in, glanced at the baby in my arms, and decided in front of everyone that we were trash he needed to throw away. My name is Zola Akani. I was 26. When my life split in two, before that day I was the quiet librarian from the third ward, the girl who shelved worn-out romance novels and told kids to whisper, the one with the soft voice and the two big dreams, and somehow I had married into the Dumont family, a dynasty of real estate money, charity galas, and polished photo spreads in Southern lifestyle magazines. Kofi swept into my life when I was 22, tall and easy with his smile, and the kind of confidence that made you think he'd never heard the word no. He brought coffee to my desk when I was working late, donated computers to the library in his family's name, told me I was different from everyone he'd ever met, that I grounded him, that his world made sense when I was in it, and for a while I believed him. I believed him even when his mother looked at my thrift store dress at the engagement dinner and asked if the city didn't have better boutiques, even when his sister Nala laughed at my accent, even when his father Sterling shook my hand as if I were a contractor and not the woman his son was going to marry. I told myself love would soften them, time would prove them wrong. That night in the hospital shattered that illusion. I had been in labor for 8 hours. No epidural because the insurance he promised to take care of later never came through. My mother was too sick to travel. My two best friends had no car to make it across town. So it was just me and the nurse who kept squeezing my hand, saying, "Come on, baby, you got this." And when my son finally slid into the world and let out a thin, stubborn cry, I thought the worst was over. I pressed him to my chest and whispered his name, Kian, a name I chose from a book in the children's section, strong and simple and mine. The door opened an hour later, and Kofi walked in as if he'd been delayed at a business lunch. Not the birth of his first child. Designer shirt crisp, watch gleaming, cologne announcing his presence before his voice did. Behind him swept his mother in a cream suit and diamonds, his sister in a tight dress, all three of them filling the cramped room with a cold that made the fluorescent light seem harsher. "You're late," I whispered, raw, exhausted, but happy enough to forgive it if he would just come closer. He didn't answer. He just stared at Kian, his eyes narrowing, his jaw tightening, something ugly rearranging his face. "What is this?" he said finally. Each word clean and sharp. I gave a small stunned laugh. "He's your son, Kofi, our son." His mother stepped forward, her perfume fighting the smell of antiseptic. She looked at Kian like he was something she'd found on the bottom of her shoe. "That is not a Dumont," she said, lips curling. Nala snickered behind her hand, and my skin went hot and cold all at once. "What are you talking about?" I asked, clutching Kian closer as if they might snatch him away. Kofi turned to the nurse who had just entered to check my vitals. "I want the administrator," he snapped. "I am not signing any birth certificate. That bastard is trash. He doesn't deserve my last name." The words slammed into me harder than any contraction. The nurse froze. Other patients' relatives turned their heads from the hallway, and suddenly my humiliation was a spectacle. I could feel eyes on the hospital gown gaping at my back, on my sweat-plastered hair, on my brown skin holding a baby no one wanted. "How can you say that?" I choked out. "Look at him, look at me. He's yours." Kofi finally met my gaze, and for the first time since we'd married, I saw nothing soft in his eyes, only suspicion and disgust. "Do you think I'm stupid?" he hissed. "That child looks nothing like me. You think I'll carry the burden of some other man's mistake? He is not a mistake, he is your son." I said, the room spinning, my stitches throbbing. "Don't raise your voice at me," he roared, slamming his hand on the wall so hard the metal clipboard rattled. His mother folded her arms. "I told you from the beginning she wanted our name, not our love," she said. "Girls like her always do, and now she doesn't even know who the father is." Something inside me snapped. "You don't know anything about me," I shouted, trembling. The baby started to wail, high and frightened, as if he could feel the hatred hanging in the air. That was when Dr. Mahdi walked in, tall, tired, with gray at his temples and a calm that usually soothed me. Today, even he looked shaken. "Is Everything all right here? He asked. Kofi pointed at me. This woman is trying to pin an illegitimate child on me. I want tests, proof, whatever it takes. I will not allow a false name on a legal document. The doctor's eyes flicked to Kian, then to me, then back to Kofi, and there was a long, awful pause. Mr. Dumont, he said slowly, I would like to speak with you in private about something we noticed. I have nothing to talk about. Kofi snapped. The only important thing is that this is not my child. Please, it's important, the doctor insisted, but my husband had already turned away. We're leaving, he told his mother. Let her deal with her mess. I tried to sit up, pain tearing through my abdomen. Kofi, don't go, please, we can talk, we can fix this. Mrs. Dumont leaned in close enough that I could see the perfect line of her lipstick. I hope you have a good story ready for that boy. When he asks who his father is, she whispered. Then they turned their backs and walked out, taking the air with them. The nurse shut the door softly. The noise of the corridor fell away, and for a moment all I could hear was my son's fragile cry and the roaring rush of blood in my ears as everything I thought I knew about my life cracked down the middle. When the door closed and their footsteps faded, Dr. Amadi moved closer, his face gentler now, but lined with something that made my stomach twist. Kian hiccuped against my chest, his tiny fists curling and uncurling. Zola, the doctor said quietly, I'm sorry you had to go through that. You need to rest, but there is something I must tell you. I wiped my face with the back of my hand, my eyes raw. If this is about my husband, there's nothing left to say. He made his choice. It's not just about him, the doctor replied, glancing at the baby. During the routine screening, we noticed an anomaly in your son's genetic markers. At first we thought it was a lab error, but we repeated it. Fear sliced through my anger. Is he sick? Is something wrong with him? The doctor took a breath, choosing his words. We suspect a rare mitochondrial condition. It doesn't mean he will die. It means we must monitor him and perhaps treat him early. But what is relevant right now is how we identified it. His DNA shows a pattern that does not match your genetic profile or your husband's, yet it does suggest a link to someone closely related to him. The words landed like foreign objects. I don't understand, I whispered. Are you saying I cheated on my husband without knowing it? Tears blurred my vision again. I have never been with another man. Never, I swear before God. I am not accusing you of anything. He said, I am telling you the science. We will need further testing, and you will have to decide what to do with that information. But right now you just gave birth. Your body is in shock. I want you to think about your health and your son's safety first. He left me with a stack of discharge papers and an ache that went beyond my stitches. The nurse came in hours later with a tray of bland food and a sympathetic look. Do you have someone to pick you up? She asked. I shook my head. My mother was hooked up to machines 2 states away. My friends lived in apartments with more roaches than chairs. The Dumonts had made it clear I no longer existed. You can stay a few hours, she said softly. But we'll need the bed, I'm sorry. I signed the forms with a trembling hand, every letter of my name feeling less real. 2 days later, I walked out of the hospital carrying Kian in a cheap blanket and a plastic bag with a carton of formula the social worker had managed to get me. The Houston sun hit me like a slap. Too bright for the life I was returning to, I took 2 buses back to the neighborhood where I grew up, the 3rd Ward streets uneven under my feet, the air thick with fry oil and car exhaust, and the faint comfort of spices from someone's kitchen. My mother's old house waited like a tired relative, paint peeling, roof patched with mismatched shingles. The water had been shut off months ago, but it was the only place that hadn't rejected me. I laid Kian on the least broken part of the couch and sat beside him, numb. My phone buzzed with messages. I was too afraid to open. When I finally looked, there were news alerts, blurry photos of Kofi leaving the hospital with his mother, headlines screaming about a billionaire heir who refused to sign his child's birth certificate. Strangers debated my life in comment sections. Some called me a gold digger. Others called him a monster. But none of them knew that I was sitting in a house with no running water, counting 6 diapers and wondering how long I could make them last. The next morning I went to the corner store, Kian strapped to my chest in a borrowed carrier. Mr. A, can I get milk and wipes on credit? I'll pay as soon as I find work. The owner wouldn't meet my eyes. Zola, things are hard right now. You already owe me from before, and with that mess on the news, I don't want trouble with rich people, I'm sorry. Every time someone said they were sorry, it felt like another door slamming. I walked out of the store, trying to hold on to the last shreds of my pride I had made it halfway down the block when a voice called from across the street. Hey, baby girl, come here. I turned and saw Miss Coretta leaning on the rusted gate of her porch. She had known me since I was little, the kind of neighbor who always had sugar when your mama ran out. You look like a strong wind could blow you over, she said, opening the gate. Bring that baby inside. Her kitchen smelled like collard greens and bleach, comfort and survival. She fed me toast and sweet tea while Kian slept in a laundry basket lined with a towel. I don't know what you did or didn't do, and to be honest, I don't care, she said, smoothing my hair the way my mother used to. All I know is that child didn't ask to be born into nobody's drama, and you can't do this alone, so you're staying here until you figure it out. It was the first time in days I let myself cry without covering my face. That night, lying on the thin mattress in her spare room, I tried to replay my life like a movie, looking for a scene that could explain how science said my baby wasn't Kofi's, and somewhere between the tears and exhaustion a memory floated up. A glass of wine at the Dumont mansion, a night when Kofi had left on a business trip and his father insisted I shouldn't eat alone. The taste of something bitter under the sweetness, my limbs turning heavy, the hallway stretching longer than it was, then nothing. Blank film where my memory should have been. I bolted upright, heart racing, Kian stirred and whimpered, and in that dark little room I realized the worst nightmare might not be that my husband didn't believe me, but that something unspeakable had happened while I couldn't move to stop it. The next days blurred into survival. I found a cleaning job in a downtown office building after begging the night supervisor to take a chance on me. You can bring the baby, but if he cries too much, you're out, she warned. So every evening I laid Kian in a cardboard box lined with one of Miss Coretta's softest blankets, tucked him under a desk in the corner of the janitor's closet, and mopped endless corridors of polished marble while my body ached from birth, grief, and bleach. By sunrise I stumbled back to the house to catnap for a few hours before starting all over again. Kian began to show small signs that made my stomach knot. His breathing sometimes came in strange little gasps. His tiny hands shook when he slept. The fever came and went like an unwelcome guest. One afternoon his lips turned slightly blue, and my heart stopped. I rushed him to the community clinic 3 bus stops away, sweating and whispering prayers under my breath. The young doctor on duty examined him with a frown, listened to his heart, ordered blood work. I'm not going to lie to you, he said. This could be something serious, maybe neurological, maybe metabolic. We need full genetic and metabolic panels at a bigger hospital. I swallowed. How much will that cost? He named a number so big it might as well have been the distance to the moon. There are foundations, charity programs, but they move slowly, he added. This shouldn't. I walked out of the clinic with a pamphlet I couldn't read through my tears. That night I took off my wedding ring. The ring Kofi had slid onto my finger in front of hundreds of guests under a canopy of fairy lights and promises, and I pawned it for enough money to buy formula, diapers, and 3 days of bus fare. I thought that would be my lowest point, but life still had a basement to show me. A week later there was a knock at Miss Coretta's door. A young woman in jeans and a blazer stood on the front step holding a notebook and a microphone bearing the logo of a local TV station. Are you Zola Akani? She asked. I froze. My first instinct was to slam the door and disappear, but running had never saved me from anything. Who's asking? I said instead, my voice smaller than I wanted. My name is Savannah Jones. I've been following the story about the Dumonts. I know you've been painted as a liar and a gold digger, but I don't think that's the truth. I'd like to hear your side, only if you want to tell it. I thought about Kofi's mother, about internet trolls in comment sections, about my son's face when he coughed in his sleep. If I talk, they'll come for me. I whispered. They already came for you, Savannah replied. The difference is now you might not be alone. Later, when I told Miss Coretta about it, she shrugged. The rich have their cameras, baby, but now so do we. Just make sure whoever points one at you isn't trying to eat off your pain. While I hesitated, someone else moved faster. A letter appeared under our door one evening. No return address, no name, just block letters on cheap paper. He wasn't the only one in that house who looked at you differently. It read, my skin prickled. I read it 3 times, feeling watched even though the window shades were drawn. Miss Coretta peered over my shoulder. What does that mean? She asked. I think it means I'm not crazy, I answered, clutching Kian close. In the Dumont mansion, meanwhile, other storms were brewing. I didn't know the details then, but I would learn them later from court transcripts and Kofi's own trembling voice. He had ordered a private DNA test to confirm what he desperately wanted to believe. The result came back negative. There were allegedly no common markers between him and my son. He took that paper as proof that betraying me in the hospital had been justified. He burned the provisional birth certificate, called his lawyer, and told him to cut me off from every account that had my name on it. But while he was trying to erase me, another, older secret was clawing its way to the surface. Kofi's younger brother, Osei, had started asking their mother about a girl named Aaliyah who used to work at the house. Why did she really leave? He pressed. Why does Dad get so mad when anyone says her name? His mother shut him down with the kind of fear-sharpened anger only the long-subjugated know. That story is over. Do you hear me? We don't talk about it. We don't think about it. We just thank God you boys have the life you have. But secrets are like cracks in old walls. They widen no matter how much paint you slap on them. While the Dumont scrambled to contain gossip and investors, I took a different route. I went to a free legal clinic housed in a building that smelled like dust and cheap ink. A young lawyer with tired eyes and a name tag that read Imani Grant sat across from me, listened to my whole story without interrupting once. Her pen only moved to write down dates and names. I want him to at least help with our son's medical bills, I said at the end, feeling both ashamed and furious. I want the truth to come out, but I don't even know how to prove it. She tapped her pen against the folder. First, we file for support. Whether the child is biologically his or not, you are married, he has obligations. Second, we get our own genetic tests from a lab that isn't on their payroll. Third, we start asking who that anonymous letter came from and who else in that house looked at you differently. I stared at her. Do you believe me? I asked, braced for another polite lie. She met my gaze head-on. Zola, the system doesn't let me put belief in emotion, but yes, I believe you, and I believe something ugly is hiding behind all that polished charity money. I've seen it before. When the new genetic results arrived weeks later, I brought the envelope to her office with shaking hands. Together we read the words that put a name to my worst fear. My son's DNA did not match Kofi's, but it did show a high probability of relation to his immediate family, a pattern consistent with paternity from an older male relative. We both stared at the page in silence, my ears roaring. Sterling, I whispered while burning my throat. His father, it has to be him. We'll need more evidence before a judge will even let us whisper that in court, Imani said, voice tight. But if this is true, he's not just a cruel father-in-law, he's a predator. And I'm willing to lose sleep going after him if you are. I looked down at Kian sleeping in his carrier, his chest rising and falling a little too fast, and I made the first real decision of my new life. I've already lost my marriage, my reputation, my savings. I said, the only thing left they can take is my voice, and I'm done giving that away for free. It's one thing to suspect something unspeakable and another to say it out loud where the world can hear. The day I chose to do that was also the day I walked back through the gates of the Dumont mansion. My knees almost buckled when the ironwork loomed over me, the lawn manicured to the point of absurdity, fountains whispering as if nothing bad had ever happened on that land. The security guard at the front looked surprised to see me, his eyes flicking from my face to the baby on my hip. Mrs. Dumont isn't expecting you, he said, and my throat tightened around the title that no longer belonged to me. Good, I replied. If she had time to prepare, she'd probably call the police. He hesitated, then buzzed me in, maybe out of habit, maybe out of curiosity. Mrs. Odette Dumont was seated in the formal living room, china cup in hand, her sister opposite her. The same cold elegance I remembered from holiday dinners where she picked at her food and picked me apart with her eyes. When she saw me, her lips thinned. You have some nerve walking in here after the circus you created, she said. What do you want? Money, attention, a second chance. My legs shook, but I kept my voice steady. I want to talk about your husband, I said, and about Aaliyah. At the sound of that name, the color drained from her face so fast it was like a curtain being yanked down. Her sister muttered something under her breath and excused herself. leaving us alone. The silence between us was heavy. "I know he is Kian's father," I said, each word costing me. "I have the tests, and I have a memory of a night when I couldn't move. When I heard him walking down the hallway after Kofi had left for a trip, you knew something was wrong back then, just like you knew what happened to Aaliyah." Her hands trembled as she set the cup down, porcelain clinking against the saucer. "You don't understand the kind of man he is," she whispered. "He built this empire from nothing. He has friends in every courtroom in the state. Do you think you're the first woman he's threatened into silence?" Rage flickered through my horror. "So you admit it," I said. "You knew what he was capable of, and you married your son's lives to his anyway." She looked older suddenly, lines I'd never noticed cutting deep into her face. "When I married him, he was already powerful. By the time I realized what he truly was, I had 2 boys and no way out that didn't risk them. The first time I saw Aaliyah crying in the laundry room, I told myself I had misinterpreted, that young girls fall in love with rich men all the time. The second time, when I saw her bruises, I confronted him. He told me if I said one word he would ruin me and take my children, and he could, Zola. He could, after she disappeared. He told everyone she stole jewelry and ran away. I knew it wasn't true, but fear is a cage you build around yourself. After a while you forget the door is open. You watched him do the same thing to me," I said, my voice shaking. "You watched your son call me a liar in a hospital room while the man who hurt me sat in his leather chair and pretended to be respectable." Tears gathered in her eyes, but I felt no comfort in them. "I told myself you would be safer if I didn't stir it up, that maybe he'd leave you alone if you stayed quiet. I was wrong," she murmured. "I've been wrong for years." I set the DNA results on the coffee table between us like a bomb. "I don't need your guilt. I need your testimony," I said, "because I'm going to the police, and to the press if I have to. And when I do, he will come at me with everything he's got. I can't stop that, but you can choose which side of the story you want to be on when it happens." That night, Imani and I dug into the ghost of Aaliyah. We found an old missing persons report closed due to lack of leads. A few grainy photos of her in the background of society snapshots, smiling with the kind of joy that doesn't know yet what it's about to lose. And finally, a record of a patient in a private psychiatric facility an hour outside the city with her name and age. "He buried her alive," Imani said, fury simmering just under the words. "She used her credentials to get us in for a supervised visit. I wasn't allowed beyond the waiting area because of Kian, but I watched through the glass as she walked down a corridor lined with locked doors. When she came back an hour later, her hands were shaking. She remembers enough to know he ruined her life," she said, "but not enough to testify clearly. They've kept her sedated for years, Zola. Her chart is a crime scene all by itself." As if that weren't enough, a few days later a short audio clip surfaced online. Anonymous, a voice recording ripped from some file or camera. I heard it first on my phone. The sound quality grainy, but the fear in the woman's voice unmistakable. "He drugged me. I couldn't move. I didn't want this. Please, somebody help me," she sobbed. The first time I heard it, my knees gave out, and I slid down the wall of Miss Coretta's kitchen, the phone clattering to the floor. Because it wasn't just any voice, it was mine, begging in a night I wasn't allowed to remember. Somewhere, somehow, someone had recorded my worst moment and buried it, and now, like everything else, it was clawing its way back to the light. News moves quickly when blood and money are involved. The day after the audio leaked, Kofi listened to it alone in his office, surrounded by the trappings of a life that suddenly meant nothing. I heard later that he replayed it 3 times, shrinking inside with each desperate plea that echoed from his phone's tiny speaker. He remembered the night now, or at least his part in it, remembered his father pouring him a drink before his flight, reassuring him that I would be well taken care of, that the house was safe, that loyalty was a family value, remembered the way I'd seemed different when he returned days later, brittle and distant, how I'd flinched when he touched me, how he'd chosen to interpret it as ingratitude rather than trauma. Hearing my voice beg for help cracked something in him that money couldn't patch. He drove straight to the mansion and barged into Sterling's study. No polite knock, no practiced smile, just raw, shaking rage. "What did you do to her?" he demanded. His father raised an eyebrow, calmly swirling amber liquid in a crystal glass. "You're too emotional again, Kofi. We've talked about this weakness of yours. You drugged my wife. Kofi shouted, voice breaking. You violated her in her own home, in my home, and now there's proof. Did you think it would never surface? Did you think you could bury this forever? Sterling's eyes went flat, the way a predator's do when it realizes the prey is teeth. I did what needed to be done to show you the world. Isn't a fairy tale. You insisted on marrying beneath you, ignoring my advice. Now you see the consequences. She was a person, not a lesson, Kofi roared. And the child you made her carry is innocent. He's sick. He needs treatment. And you are going to let him die to save your name. Sterling laughed softly, a chilling sound. Men like me don't die from scandal. We outspend it, outtalk it, outlive it. What are you going to do? Go to the press and tell them your father is a monster. You think they'll believe the ungrateful son over the man who built half the city? I think they might if I stand next to the woman you destroyed, Kofi replied, and something in his stance shifted, the son finally stepping out of the shadow of the father. He walked out of the room and didn't look back. That same evening, while Sterling was making calls to sympathetic judges and PR strategists, Kofi was making a different call. He reached Imani, offered to testify against his own blood. I don't deserve forgiveness, he said when we met in her office, his eyes red-rimmed, his suit hanging looser on him than I remembered. I let them break you, and I didn't even ask why the pieces didn't look like the woman I married. I cared more about my last name than your voice, but if you'll let me, I want to help you take him down. His words scraped old wounds. Part of me wanted to hit him, to scream that his help came too late, but another part heard the tremor in his voice and recognized it, the sound of someone realizing the ground they trusted is rotten. I don't know if I'll ever forgive you, I said, Kian sleeping against my chest, a thin tube taped to his hand from his latest hospital stay. But this isn't about my feelings. It's about making sure he never does this again. If you're serious, you'll testify. You'll stand in front of cameras and say his name. You'll hand over every email, every financial record, every favor he ever bragged about, and you won't flinch when it hurts. Kofi nodded. Whatever it takes, he said, and for once, I believed him. The press conference happened 2 days later on the courthouse steps. Microphones clustered like metal flowers at the podium, reporters buzzing, cameras rolling live. I stood slightly behind Imani, my hand on Kian's stroller, my legs trembling. Kofi stepped up to the mic, took a long breath, and detonated the truth in front of the world. My name is Kofi Dumont, he began, voice hoarse but steady. I am the son of Sterling Dumont, and today I stand not as his heir but as a witness to his crimes. The child my wife gave birth to, the child I publicly rejected, is not another man's mistake, as I once claimed. He is the product of my father's abuse. My father drugged and violated my wife while I was out of town, then manipulated me into believing she was unfaithful. This is not the first time he has done this, and unless we stop him, it won't be the last. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A reporter shouted a question, another shouted a second, but he held up a hand. You can ask me anything later. Right now, I'm asking you to listen to the women whose lives he shattered, starting with my wife, who deserved a partner and found herself sleeping next to the son of her attacker. When he stepped aside, every camera lens pivoted toward me like a living creature. Imani squeezed my hand. You don't owe them anything, she murmured. Say only what you want. I walked up to the mic, my heart beating so hard it blurred the edges of my vision. For a long time I thought I was crazy. I said, I woke up in a house full of strangers in suits with a body that didn't feel like mine. I carried a child I loved but couldn't explain. I was called a liar, a whore, a thief of a good name, and I believed maybe I deserved it. Today I know I didn't. Today I know the blame belongs to one man and to everyone who stayed silent to protect him. My voice shook, but I didn't stop. If you're watching this and something like this happened to you, I want you to hear me. It was not your fault. Even if you can't remember everything, even if they made you doubt your own mind, you're not crazy, you were hurt. By the time I stepped back, my palms were damp on the podium, but a strange calm settled over me, like breathing after being underwater too long. The days that followed were chaos. Some news outlets called me brave. Others implied I was a gold digger who had found a new angle. Anonymous accounts flooded my social media with hate or love, sometimes both in the same sentence. But the tide had turned in one undeniable way. Women started coming forward, former housekeepers, assistants, interns, each with a story that sounded too familiar. Dizziness after a drink, a blurred memory, a paycheck, and a threat, each one another stone laid on the path toward a courtroom. Power doesn't surrender politely. It claws and bargains and lies until its last breath. Sterling was arrested once, cameras flashing as officers led him from his mansion in handcuffs, his expensive sunglasses flashing like armor. He spent 72 hours in a cell and came out smirking, released on a technicality signed by a judge whose campaign he had funded years ago. "The system works," his lawyer declared to the press, ignoring the tremor in his own hand. The outrage that followed reached farther than any of us expected. Activists organized marches. Women carried signs with slogans that made my throat tighten. "We believe Zola. No more princes above the law. Silence is complicity." I pushed Kian's stroller at the front of one demonstration, flanked by Imani and Savannah, with Aaliyah walking a step behind us, her movements still a little stiff from years of medication. But her gaze clear for the first time since I'd met her. "He told me no one would ever believe me," she said quietly as we walked. "Look at them," I replied, nodding at the crowd. "It looks like he miscalculated." People donated to a fund for Kian's treatment, shared our story across borders and languages. Still, in the middle of the noise, there were nights I sat on the floor of the tiny apartment I'd rented with the first settlement check from a civil suit against the Dumont estate, watching my son sleep with a monitor strapped to his chest, and felt like a little girl again, waiting for a door to slam. The medical bills were mountains I climbed over and over. Kian's surgery loomed like a storm cloud. Without it, his condition could steal his strength, his speech, his future. The hospital demanded a deposit that laughed at my bank account. The crowdfunding helped. Kofi quietly sold his shares in a tech startup and gave the money to Imani to wire to the hospital. "Don't tell her it's from me," he said. But she did anyway because we had promised not to keep secrets anymore. "This doesn't fix what you did," I told him when he came to visit Kian before the operation, standing awkwardly beside the hospital bed. "I know," he answered, eyes on our son's small bandaged hand. "I'm not trying to buy absolution. I'm trying to be the man I should have been when you still believed I could be." The surgery took hours that felt like days. I sat in the waiting room with my fingers laced so tightly they went numb, whispering every prayer my mother ever taught me. When the surgeon finally emerged, mask pulled down, and said, "It went well. He's a fighter," my knees nearly buckled with relief. But even in that joy, fear lingered because Sterling wasn't done. He began moving money to offshore accounts, hiring private security not just as a show but as a shield. Rumor had it he was planning to flee the country while his lawyers stalled the criminal case. "He's going to run," Imani said one night, pacing her living room, legal files stacked like small skyscrapers on the coffee table. "If he makes it onto a plane, all will have left are stories and a conviction in absentia that won't touch him." Kofi hired a private investigator. Guilt turned into fuel. They tracked Sterling's movements, the late-night meetings, the calls to an old contact who specialized in fake passports. One humid evening, the investigator called Imani. "He's heading to the airport tonight. Private terminal, flight to a country with no extradition treaty. If you're going to stop him, this is your shot." We drove to the airport in a silence thick with adrenaline. I left Kian with Miss Coretta, my heart torn. But I couldn't let the man who hurt us disappear above the clouds. We weren't alone. The district attorney met us there with 2 officers and an emergency warrant. The private terminal gleamed with polished floors and hushed wealth. Sterling stood at the counter, passport in hand, wearing a casual jacket and a sneer. When he saw us, his eyes flicked over me like I was a fly that had found its way into his glass. "You just don't know when to stop, do you?" he drawled. "This is pathetic. You think a last-minute tantrum is going to keep me here?" "No," Imani said, stepping forward with the warrant. "But this will." The officers approached, reciting rights I had never heard spoken to someone like him. Sterling laughed. Even as they clicked the cuffs around his wrists, "The world is full of traitors," he said, looking at Kofi, "sons who forget who fed them." For the first time since I met him, I saw something crack in his eyes. Not fear exactly, but the dawning understanding that money and connections couldn't magic away every consequence. "No," I said quietly, my voice steady in a way it had never been around. "Him. The world is full of women who stopped being afraid." Cameras appeared as if conjured. Someone had tipped off the press. Flashes popped. Reporters shouted questions, and Sterling Dumont, king of polished charity galas and backroom deals, was escorted through the terminal not as a benefactor but as a criminal. The automatic doors slid shut behind him, and in the echo of their whoosh, I felt some of the weight I'd been carrying slip from my shoulders. The trial was a marathon of ghosts, each witness bringing a piece of the puzzle, each exhibit another shard of glass we all had to walk across. I sat through opening statements and cross-examinations with my hands folded in my lap. Kian at home with a nurse, his health slowly strengthening thanks to the treatment the donations and settlements had made possible. The prosecutor laid out a picture of a man who used his wealth as a weapon, sedating women who trusted him, locking some of them away in private facilities when they tried to speak, shredding evidence with one hand while signing charity checks with the other. Sterling's lawyers tried to paint us as liars, opportunists, hysterics. They questioned my memory, suggesting the audio could have been fabricated. They implied Aaliyah's diagnosis made her unreliable. They insinuated that Kofi had turned on his father out of greed or resentment. But this time the truth had too many witnesses to be shoved back into the dark. Aaliyah took the stand one morning, her hands trembling on the Bible as she swore to tell the truth. Her voice quivered as she described waking up in a bed she didn't remember entering. Sterling's face the first thing she saw, the way he told her no one would believe a girl like her over a man like him, the threats of having her deported if she opened her mouth. The night orderlies showed up at her door with papers and pills that took her away from her life and her body for years. There wasn't a dry eye in the jury box, except Sterling's. He watched her with an expression that hovered between boredom and annoyance, as if we were inconveniencing him with our pain. When it was my turn, I walked to the stand on legs that remembered that hospital corridor, the cold of the Dumont mansion's marble floors, the heat of the humiliation in that delivery room. I told my story from beginning to end. From the first time Kofi brought me to meet his family, to the glass of wine that tasted off, to waking up with my clothes wrong and my body sore in ways I couldn't explain, to the denial I wrapped around myself like a blanket because the truth was too terrifying to hold. I described the hospital scene, the DNA results, the anonymous letter, the night I heard my own voice begging for help from a device in Savannah's hands. The courtroom felt smaller as I spoke, as if the walls were leaning in to listen. When the defense attorney tried to rattle me, suggesting I was exaggerating for money, I looked him straight in the eye and said, "There is no amount you could pay me to live this story. I would have preferred to stay poor and anonymous in my little library than to stand here because someone decided my body was his lesson to teach." Kofi testified after me, his voice breaking when he admitted his complicity, however unknowing, his pride and cowardice that made my suffering worse. "I'm not here as a hero," he said. "I'm here as proof that silence feeds monsters." Sterling never took the stand. His lawyers said his health was too fragile, but we all knew it was just one more attempt to control the narrative. In the end, it didn't matter. The jury deliberated for hours that felt like days, and when they filed back into the courtroom, faces solemn, my heart pounded so hard I thought I'd faint. "On the count of aggravated sexual assault, how do you find the defendant?" the judge asked. "Guilty," the foreperson replied, one word that cracked open something heavy inside my chest. They read charge after charge: coercion, unlawful confinement, fraud, evidence tampering, attempted flight, each one followed by that same word: guilty, guilty, guilty. Sterling's mask didn't fully break until the sentence was read. Life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. His jaw clenched, lips pressed into a thin line, as if he could hold the whole world's judgment out by sheer force. But the gavel came down anyway, and for the first time since he walked into my life, like a shadow. Behind his son, he was truly contained. Outside the courthouse, people cheered, cried, hugged strangers. Some held candles, others held up copies of the verdict. I stood on the steps with Kian on my hip, his head resting on my shoulder. The afternoon sun warm on our faces, the cameras surged toward me. Microphones thrust forward. "How do you feel, Zola?" someone shouted. It was such a small question for such a large answer. "I feel like I can finally breathe," I said simply later. When the noise faded, life didn't magically turn into a movie ending. Bills still came. Kian still needed medicine and therapy. The scars on my mind didn't vanish with the verdict, but there was room now. Room to imagine a future that wasn't built on fear. I went back to the library part-time, shelving books under buzzing fluorescent lights. I started writing at a little table in the corner during my breaks, at first just fragments, memories that wouldn't let me sleep, then chapters, then a manuscript. I called it The Son of Silence, a story about a boy born into a lie who became the reason truth finally shouted. A small independent publisher agreed to print it. We did a launch at the community center, the same place where I once stood in line for donated diapers. The turnout shocked me. Readers, survivors, neighbors, strangers who had watched our case on TV. The book sold faster than anyone expected, not because I was special, but because the story was too common and people were hungry for someone to name it. With the money that trickled in, plus donations and a civil settlement the Dumont estate couldn't lawyer their way out of, I started the Kian Foundation, free legal aid and counseling for victims of abuse by powerful people. We rented a modest office, painted the walls a hopeful yellow, hung art done by survivors. Imani became our legal director. Aaliyah volunteered at the front desk, greeting women with a shy smile that grew surer each day. Miss Coretta sat in a rocking chair near the coffee machine, ready with tissues and jokes. Kofi helped quietly behind the scenes, handling spreadsheets, talking to donors, picking up Kian from school when I had late meetings. One evening, after a long day of consultations, he and I sat on a park bench watching our son chase pigeons, his legs sturdier now, his laughter loud and free. "I don't expect you to ever love me again," Kofi said, eyes on Kian. "I just hope one day when he asks about his father, you can tell him I tried to make things right after I finally saw the truth." I didn't answer right away. I watched Kian trip, then get up and keep running. "I'll tell him his father was a man who made terrible mistakes and then chose to spend the rest of his life carrying them instead of pretending they were someone else's burden," I said. "I'll tell him people can change. But that doesn't mean we owe them our hearts," he nodded, accepting the boundary, grateful for the small mercy. Years later, on a warm March afternoon, Kian walked beside me under a sky so blue it looked painted, his hand tucked in mine. He was 6 now, curious and stubborn, his illness managed but never fully gone. "Mom, why did you name the foundation after me?" he asked suddenly. I looked down at him, his eyes so bright they made the shadows in my memory seem smaller. "Because you were born in a room full of silence and lies," I said, "and your life turned that silence into something loud and brave. I wanted other people to feel that too." He thought about it, then grinned. "So, I'm like a superhero," he declared, flexing his skinny arms. I laughed, real laughter that didn't hurt in my chest. "Yeah, baby, something like that." We walked a little farther, his chatter about school and cartoons filling the air, and for the first time since that hospital room, I realized the worst pain hadn't destroyed me. It had broken me open just enough to let other women's voices in, to build something bigger than my fear, bigger than his cruelty, bigger than their name. That night, as I tucked Kian into bed, he asked, "Mom, will you tell me a story? Not the sad one, a new one." I sat on the edge of his mattress, brushed his curls back from his forehead. "I'll tell you about a girl who thought she was alone, and then found out the world was full of people ready to stand beside her once she dared to speak," I said, and as his eyes drifted closed, I whispered a thank you to the version of me who had walked into that courthouse shaking but unbroken, the woman who chose truth over comfort, justice over quiet, and love over shame. If you stayed with me until the end of this story, thank you from the bottom of my heart. I would love to know which moment touched you the most and from which city or country you were listening. Share your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one, and your words mean more than you know. If this story moved you or gave you strength, please don't forget to like the video, share it with someone who may need to hear it, and subscribe so you don't miss the next life story on your screen. You'll find more emotional stories waiting for you. I hope you'll join me there, with love and respect. Until the next one.